I think the big piece is to understand as a job seeker, you need to find a way to do one of two things, and probably both together. But one of them is to add value. Wherever you're going into, find a way to add value. It's said a lot, but the execution of that is few and far between today, I can tell you. Like in my industry, I have a lot of people tell me how good they are. You know, they might come from a chef background, or they might come from a multi-million-dollar restaurant background where I've managed this many people, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's, okay, I see that you could probably add value here, but then also, how are you going to add value to our company culture? Because everything you've gone to, there's always going to be a different fit. The other thing I would say is just remember, you know, kind of when you said is it subjective? Yes, it is subjective. But when you go through those things that I just listed off, remind yourself, what can I do to enhance that piece of the company, right? And so, hey, you're not going in and saying, you know, if you go in and hear a mission statement that you don't agree with, okay, we can be adaptable, but if it's a non-negotiable, why are we going past that? Because if they mean that much to you, then that's probably not a place, you know, that's fit for you. You know, again, on both sides, people and companies can, you know, throw out mission statements on their website, and they can throw out mission statements, you know, but really kind of trying to connect those to things that have happened in the company as far as show me an example, you know, like try to find examples of things they've done.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Job Seeker's Journey podcast. Today's episode is one that I am excited to bring you for a couple of reasons. First, I love having topics that not only apply to job seekers, which is obviously the main audience of this podcast, but also to those who are currently employed, but maybe looking for tips and tricks to better their current position at where they're at, or if they're thinking about leaving their current position and need things to think about as they're going along their journey. I wanted this podcast to be a resource for all of those things. And today, the topic that we speak about delivers. The second reason why I'm excited about today is because I get to bring on a person that I really love as a person and that I highly respect as a business person. Today, I bring on my friend, JT Scott. Now, it'll be no secret that we are good friends. Our families live close together. I love his wife. I love his kids. I love being around them. We see each other all the time. They are great to my family, and it is no secret that we are good friends. But on the flip side of that, JT Scott is one of those people that I look up to in the business world. I've gotten to watch him be a general manager at a McAllister's Deli from the very first time I met him, and watch him get promoted to now his current position, which is a regional director for the Saxton Group, which is a franchisee of McAllister's Deli. He has some amazing ideas, an amazing leadership qualities that I admire, that I look up to every time he talks about it. And I was really excited to have him come on and speak about something that I know is something that's close to his heart. He is not only a supervisor of many different stores, he is a person who takes great pride. In fact, you'll see him light up as he talks about development and just bringing people along in their careers. This is going to be part one of our conversation. Next week, we'll have part two where we talk about the professional development part. But today's topic will be about how do we identify a company, whether you are currently working there or whether you are looking for your next opportunity. How do we identify that the company has a strong and positive culture? Something we all should be thinking about as we go through our job searching journey. I'm really excited to bring this to you. So without further ado, here is my friend, JT Scott. All right, I am here with JT Scott. Now, this is an interesting thing for me because I have had the great fortune of knowing you for, I think it's 12, 13 years at this point.
Yeah, probably
And
close to that at this point. Yeah.
yeah. And you've become probably one of, if not our closest friends for myself and our family. And it's always a little bit of a dilemma that someone has when you start something like a podcast and things like this. You always want to bring on friends and you always want to like talk to friends and things like that. But maybe what they do doesn't really translate. But I've always known since I started doing this that you were one of the people that I wanted to talk to, because not only do I respect you, your family, how you are with your family as a dad, as a husband, all of those things, it's that you're probably one of the people that I respect the most in the business setting and how you go about. And it's always been that way from the time that we knew you as a general manager to the time where you are now. So this is a great thrill for me to have you come on here because, and then not only that, but when we talked earlier, right before we decided to record this, I mean, what I was initially thinking that we would talk about was not what we're going to end up talking about, because this blew it completely out of the water. So I'm really excited for everyone to hear this today. And before we go ahead and get into this topic, I want to give you a chance to kind of go ahead and introduce yourself, kind of say what all you do so that people understand where you come from, and then we can get into the heart of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Brad, for having me. Like I said, we are good friends, so it's not, the listeners can definitely, know that ahead of time. We're not trying to keep that away from anyone, but really, first and foremost, just I'm a husband to my wife Karen. Have 3 kids, so definitely a dad at first priority and husband, right? But I do hold the title currently as the regional director of operations for a company that has a couple franchise we're franchisees for a couple companies, couple brands. Been with them for going on 14 years now. So definitely something that I've been there for a while, but I've been in the restaurant industry for 18 years. I've built a lot of skill set. I will tell you, early on in my career, definitely had, different viewpoints and different people, look at that as a certain way, right? But I could tell you this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. This industry has been something that I've really grown in, but also just been able to really flex my leadership muscles in, which is great. And it's kind of a wide open industry that you can do a lot of things in. I meet people every day that do different things in that industry, or people that are coming into the industry that are like, I never knew I could do these. So definitely something we'll talk about as we talk today. But yeah, that's kind of who I am. I'm excited to be on the podcast. Definitely following this since you started it. And I think, like you said, what we're going to talk about today is probably maybe something different than you thought. I think some of that has to do with just that vast variety of what the restaurant industry can bring to a person, but also how I've viewed the restaurant industry since the beginning has been a lot different than I would say probably most people that are either in the industry or maybe haven't been in the industry very long, don't realize what you can do with it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, hospitality is one of those things that I know a lot of people just kind of don't really think about as far as what's all behind the way it runs, right? You just see the people that take your order. You see the people that bring it out. It's good service. It's not. If it's clean, if it's not. Like you can kind of just look at things on a surface level, and you don't think about all the things and behind the scenes that are just there that have such great general qualities to learn. So I know certainly my eyes were open from the time that I just would hear you talk about day-to-day stuff when you were a general manager or whatever. And so today's topic that we're going to start with, there's a couple things we're going to cover, but the first one is culture and identifying strong and positive culture. And I think positive is a very operative word here, because I've definitely been in places where I've had strong culture that wasn't positive.
Right.
And I've been in places that was a positive culture that may not have been very strong. And then, of course, I've been in places that was both. And you can definitely feel it But this can seem like we're talking about people that are already working somewhere.
Right.
But I don't think that is necessarily the case, because as you go through a job search and as you are going through interviews, it is important to be able to identify, or try to at least identify, the culture of this place and whether or not that aligns with your values and who you are, and if you think you're going to be a good fit there. So what are some of the things, when we start talking about good and positive culture, what are some of those things that people should be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, most people, when they're talking about, culture, kind of think, what am I in today, right? And am I in a good situation? Well, hey, you might not have a job right now. That's the whole point of this podcast, right? But to identify a strong culture, really, there's a couple different things that I would probably encourage people to look for. I've been very, honored and, honestly lucky to be in a company, like I said, going on 14 years, that has a super strong culture. Now, does that mean that every day, everything's just hunky dory and perfect and whatever? No, I think that's the whole piece, is to understand that a culture is not a set of checklists. It's not it's a growing and decaying thing at all times, and it's the people there. Yes, identifying people is a big part, but it's a thing that can't just be, oh, here's 7 things that are positive for strong culture. Right. They check all the boxes. Let's move on. That's not how it works. It's a daily thing. And when you do set yourself into a company, or if you're in a company right now, you affect that culture just as much as anyone else. What you allow, those things, not just supervisors, but team members and things like that. So really what I would say is, the start of it is, let's try to identify. Let's give everyone what can I find, maybe in or outside a company, and see what it is. So the first thing I would say is, do they have clear mission and values? Okay. This is kind of one of those things I tell people, like, hopefully, if they really, have a clear and distinct values, a lot of times they're going to be on their website. They're going to be in the corporate office on the wall. They're going to be, these things maybe that organically have been founded in the company, that have maybe lasted the beginning. The famous one, if you've seen the Jordan movie Air, right? And it's about, the Nike guys, just get it done, those kind of things. And so those are taglines that you might hear even in trainings, or maybe in interviews. It's something I use a lot for ours. When I do interviews and hiring and stuff like that, I use those kind of keywords to see how people react to those. So I would say, those are something you can probably look up on a company website. You can find, certain things, honestly, just talking with people. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I would say, make sure they have clear mission and values, and make sure that that's part of the decision-making process when you're going through an interview process, right? You can ask that question, like, hey, how do your mission values, hopefully you've done some research, how do those go into the daily operations, or maybe the decision-making process, right? The second thing I would say is there employee engagement? I think kind of what in a hospitality industry, it's pretty easy because it's a lot of guest to guest facing things, right? You can see if someone enjoys their job. You can see, hey, I don't like the statement, fake it till you make it, because I feel like that's just a disservice to people that you're serving. Like, if I see one of my team members or one of my managers that I supervise, really not have a great, not having a great day, let's figure that out. And if that becomes a common theme, let's find them something that they'll be super successful in. So just making sure you have the right employee engagement. Also bringing energy to those things. We all know that there's certain people that we come in contact with, that we work with. Certain people bring energy, and other people just suck the energy, right? And so we all know those people, and maybe, trying to find the right people to work with in that team. This kind of goes with it, is kind of positive leadership. I think, in today's age, especially, if we go through certain economic times, leadership shows itself pretty quickly. It's the doom and gloom leadership, or the leader that's kind of going through and maybe a supervisor, or maybe honestly even a hiring manager. You can just kind of feel this person is going to be very, very, um, you know, not as positive as maybe you want as a fit, right? And that's kind of that whole deal. I would say the communication piece is big, when you're going through the job seeker part, right? We talk about you've talked about this with a lot of other guests I've noticed on the podcast about, like, hey, you might not always get that follow-up email, but you can still send that follow-up email, right? Like, there's not you don't have to wait on someone else to do it. You can be that person. And just make sure that those leaders are invested in the continued growth of you or your team, or wherever we're working towards. That open communication, that's a tough one, because sometimes there are restrictions in jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, transparency is great when it can happen, but not all sectors of every company can just be super transparent, right? Like, we have financial statements that maybe, you can't have that out in the world, or there's a lot of reasons for that, but just making sure that when, you are seeking a job, or if you're in your current position, is understanding when they can be transparent and if they are or not. And then you be transparent, right? Like, I think that's a hard line, especially if it's maybe not a positive experience at this point of the job, kind of putting yourself out there, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I would just say, make sure that you're being authentic in that. Make sure you're, who you are when you're going through talking with certain people, or your team, or people you work with.
Yeah.
The next thing I would kind of say, I kind of put these things together, but make sure, if you can get some research. Like I said, I'm trying to speak on people that both are in jobs and seeking jobs, but try to talk to either current employees or ex-employees of a company, and see if the collaboration is to get like a strong collaboration. Because, sometimes you get in companies and it's literally just, this department doesn't talk to this department. Well, why do they not talk to this department? It's like, there has to be some history and background on that. I think when I hear that, sometimes it puts a little red flag up for me. Like, okay, if we can't talk to each other, how are we going to be successful together? And so that's something I would probably encourage. And then, something, that you brought up here, on this podcast, and we've talked about before, is kind of that healthy work-life balance. And I use that word balance very, very in a gray area, I guess I would say.
Sure.
I don't think you're ever going to have this perfect work-life balance. I think there's seasonality to it. I think there's kind of the, this, is it in their culture to understand when people are kind of getting close to burnout, and why they're getting, hopefully those leaders are actually looking into that. And then respect for, the company time, and respect for your time. That'd be great. But just kind of defining those things, when you're looking at a culture, because sometimes it's just as easy as a conversation, right?
Yeah. And I would also throw in there that I think that it's one of the things that you hear quite a bit, and is really becoming more prevalent, which is great to see, is for not only leaders, but also for employees to understand that a lot of these may change over time. Mm-hmm. What your priority of work-life balance in different stages of your life may be different. Like, when you're young and you're coming out of school, you may just not really care that much about that, because, you're young, you don't have a family yet. You can work as long as you want. And if you're enjoying what you're doing, then work-life balance really isn't a thing. But then you get a little bit older, you got kids that are going through school. They're going to have activities after school. They're going to have programs and all kinds of things. And, that becomes a little bit more important to you. And so when you start talking about like positive leadership, I would also throw in like authenticity in leadership and the employees, and the ability to be that way to a point, because, you can get to a point like where you're just complaining about stuff and whatever else. But yeah, I think it's really important. And I'm sorry to stop you. I want to keep going, but like,
no,
I think that, it's important to understand that, what it may have been 10 years ago may not be what it is on any of these now. Like it may have changed a little bit in your values and where you're at in your life and things like that. So as you're evaluating that next company, especially, or even if you're in a current company and things have changed for you, when you're evaluating the culture, it's okay that your values have changed and that maybe your balance requirements or thoughts have changed. So sorry to interrupt you, but I like that work-life balance one a lot because that's obviously a hot button topic that gets talked about a
I think
lot
that's
now.
the whole point, right? Like it gets to this point where there is a seasonality to it. I think there's a big bell curve. Like you said, I think probably not, coming out of college and getting, these entry level job, kind of people. I don't think it should be, honestly. I think that's the time to kind of grind, is what I would call it, is, hey, I'm going to make a name for myself in this company. I'm going to do those things, but also see what team you're going to be put in. Maybe you are getting put into a team as a, you know, entry level person, but you have a bunch of senior people with you on that team. Well, they're probably going to be a little bit more hesitant on their time versus the company time, right? They've built that trust and transparency with the company, but also understand their objectives probably a little bit more than yours. And that's something honestly you can learn a lot from, right? Like, there's kind of those unwritten rules in every company, I think, of, is this okay? Or, I know this isn't technically in the policy, but this kind of thing. And so I would just really like lean on that, when you're looking at that. And it's a part of the culture, right? I think sometimes, like you said, it's a hot button topic, but none of these should be really benefited more than others. This isn't 80% work life balance and 20% positive leadership, right? It's really all together. It needs to be a piece of it, not the overwhelming part, and you need to keep that in mind as a job seeker too, is to understand that, hey, if it's a little tight maybe on the work life balance, what else is in the formula and equation that really makes this job a whole, right? And so kind of put in there. But just to kind of finish these up, I would say fair compensation and benefits. I always look at, and that can mean a lot of things. There's a wide range on this too, right? This is a part of it. Something that I think is very important when thinking of compensation and benefits is not just what my initial compensation is, but what the growth factor of that compensation is. Because today you have to put range. Every good company puts a good range in there. I kind of I saw something the other day. I think that it was a company that put out something for a welder, right? And it was like $15 to $30 an hour or whatever it was. Now welders make a lot more than that, but this is probably an old post. But it was like, the first picture was a weld that was probably something I could do, which is not saying much. And the second one was a perfect beat. And the guy's like, what's going on? And he's like, well, the first one's a $15 an hour and the second one is a $30 an hour. You get what you pay for on those things. But I would just say, when talking about that, I would just make sure that they're in competitiveness and not, expecting a bunch of things for a certain compensation that maybe they're not willing to pay. So kind of looking at that. And this one's a big one for me: low turnover and high retention. This is something that when I talk to people and I hire and look at applicants outside of our company to bring in, this is a question I get asked actually a lot is, hey, tell me about, what the common, average lifespan of a person here is. And I can, strongly say in our company, you'll see a lot of, and this isn't very common in the restaurant industry, to be honest. It's kind of an industry that seems to flip people, through and transition people out, pretty quickly. But I can look around and say, hey, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, people that have been here a long time in a great position. And so when you see that, there's probably a pretty strong culture there of an understanding of what the culture is, and people that fit that culture stay with that company a long time too. And then also it kind of shows you a little bit about if it's a company that has some seasonality to it, right? There's bunch of industries here in Oklahoma City, right, that have kind of if the economics look like this is what it looks like. If the economics look like that, this is what it looks like, right? And so when you start seeing those big, feast or famine kind of things in the company culture, you might want to ask yourself, hey, is that a risk I'm willing to take, or do I fit that? Like, okay, great. Like, I think this is going to be a great time to hop into the company and grow with the company. And then, something I talk about all the time, and I talk about a little bit on the benefits part too, is opportunities for growth.
Mhm.
Are you the last person in where we're filling this role and there's no growth factor? Like this is going to sum up this for the next 10 years? Or is this just the start? This position is just a start of, hey, if we can get this rolling and this going, here's the game plan. And those are the kind of things that I would say as far as, strong company culture.
Yeah, I know that's certainly something that you get faced with a lot when you're searching a job, because every time you talk to a recruiter, every time you talk to even an internal recruiter, they're always going to ask you, especially with a third party recruiter, what's your salary requirements and all of that. And the only way that I've learned to answer that question is, yes, I have like this range I would like to have, but if it's the right opportunity, and it's being able to define that right opportunity, which I think is what you're speaking of, the opportunity for growth, the ability to earn your way up, and that they are going to support your way of earning up and really try to help develop you, then you can really start to say, well, hey, I would like to be at, I'll just throw out arbitrary numbers. I'd like to be at 115.
Mhm.
And this company can't start at 115. Maybe they'll start at 105, but they have a clear path for you that you can really, within a year, within a couple of years, earn your way up, and they can really help you get there. And that's definitely something to take into account, because that isn't everywhere, but you can kind of get a feel for that if you know what you're looking for and kind of know how to ask that question to draw that out in an interview. And it's a bit of an art, because you can ask questions that can make people defensive, and you don't want to do that, because then that interview goes really sideways really fast. But you do want to get information from them. But even when we're talking about this, would you say this is a pretty subjective evaluation that every person is doing? Or do you think that there's a way for this to be objective when going through this observation, so that you're not just overvaluing yourself? You are objectively looking at the full picture of the company. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big piece is to understand as a job seeker, you need to find a way to do one of two things, and probably both together. But one of them is to add value wherever you're going into. Find a way to add value. It's said a lot, but the execution of that is few and far between today. I can tell you, like in my industry, I have a lot of people tell me how good they are. They might come from a chef background, or they might come from a multi-million-dollar restaurant background where I've managed this many people, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's okay. I see that you could probably add value here, but then also, how are you going to add value to our company culture? Because everything you've gone to, there's always going to be a different fit. The other thing I would say is just remember, you know, kind of when you said kind of, is it subjective? Yes, it is subjective. But when you go through those things that I just listed off, remind yourself, what can I do to enhance that piece of the company? Right.
Love
And
that.
so, hey, you're not going in and saying, if you go in and hear a mission statement that you don't agree with, okay, we can be adaptable, but if it's a non-negotiable, why are we going past that? Because if they've mean that much to you, then that's probably not a place, that's fit for you. Um, you know, Again, on both sides, people and companies can, throw out mission statements on their website, and they can throw out mission statements, but really kind of trying to connect those to things that have happened in the company, as far as, hey, show me an example, like try to find examples of things they've done. They do social media presence is big, of how you can find, what they do, especially in today's age. And honestly, I really do feel like sometimes social media will tell you kind of the raw, like they're spending money on this, right? So it's what they want you to hear, but also you can see through the things of, oh, this is important because they're spending money to point you in this direction. Um, you know, kind of talking, it's hard these days. I think, I would take everything on as far as, reviews of a company and stuff like that online. I would take all that with a grain of salt. I can tell you this, like my job has, over the last 10 years, really evolved in this way where I've had to kind of figure that skill set and grow that muscle of, okay, do I really understand what the real complaint is here, or is this just someone that feels super more comfortable on their keyboard than they do in front of our one of my managers or me, but Glassdoor, those kind of platforms, that kind of review, I would look at those, right? I think everyone, that no matter what you're doing, you go, you get VRBO, or if you get something off Amazon, you're looking at reviews. And I think we've all kind of built that muscle over the last couple of years of like, oh, this is what it really is, not really what I was, understanding. Honestly, this is kind of old school, but press, in industrial, industry news, there's stuff out there. I mean, you know, I'm not a big fan of, all press is good, good press, but I will say like, there is someone that's objective in the fact of not, a third party that's writing this about someone, right? You got to do your research. Not everything's exactly what you read, but I will say it does help, especially when you're looking at, like we talked about, that economic, maybe those economic seasonality companies that have those ebbs and flows to them. You can look at layoffs, like you can see, news presses on, hey, this was layoffs. This was, they're hiring this many people. It's the opposite too, right? Like, hey, so-and-so company is going to hire 10,000 people over the next 5 years in this position. Those are things that I would keep an eye on. Something I'm not super good at, and that, I'll tag at the end here, but, LinkedIn, that's something I'm not, because I've been in the same industry for so long, but I will say I use it as a hiring platform. So it's good to have. But I know job seekers, that's bigger and bigger. And you've talked about that with other guests, which has been great for me, honestly, even as a person with a job, just, okay, maybe I should, be a little bit better in that. And then, I would, this is a whole nother subject, but and this might be a little bit longer than you want, but networking and informational interviews, getting connected with people, no matter if they're in that company or in the space, in that industry, right? Hey, you might have been in that industry. I can tell you, like I said, I've been in this industry 18 years. And I still want to connect with people in the restaurant industry, even if it's a different concepts than that I'm running today. One of the things is they kind of show you where the waves are going. Hey, this is what everything's kind of moving towards, or this is where we're successful right now, or this is an issue we're having, a problem. And I can tell you, just getting in those networks and honestly asking someone, like I said, I've heard it 1,000 times on your podcast, go get a cup of coffee with someone. Go reach out. Social media gives us those connection points a lot easier. Now it's like I can direct message, hey, do you have time for a cup of coffee if you're local? If not, hop on a Zoom call with me here, whatever platform you want to use. But I will tell you, that keeps me engaged in what I'm doing, but also gives me confidence when maybe they're struggling with something that I'm not, and I can give some advice to that. But also, oh man, that's a problem we have as well. Like, what have you done to help that, and kind of bringing that engagement back to the company, through the filters of what you need to. But I don't think any conversation is a bad conversation. I talk to a lot of people that maybe for lunch they have like kind of you get down out of the building and there's 12 restaurants to choose from. Well, guess what? In those lines while you're waiting for lunch, you have a bunch of people that do a lot of things that you probably do, and have a conversation in line. It takes no time. You're gonna have to stand there anyway. Grocery lines, whatever. Just, I don't think any conversations are bad conversations. Even if they don't connect, maybe you right that moment. I can tell you endless stories that I've had. I had a conversation with this guy, and I find kind of that three sections away from someone, you connect with someone like, oh yeah, I did have I know so and so, and so it has happened, just as you kind of grow in your way. But and then I would kind of, this is something that really probably pushes home, more for you guys that are job seekers, um, how they brand themselves and how they hire. So their
Mhm.
practices of hiring, like you can talk to them about, hey, what's the process look like? And if they kind of don't have a good process, that might not be a bad thing, but it might be a red flag, right? If they don't really know the process, that's either one, they don't hire a lot of people, which I've been on that side of it in my, 14 years here. There's certain seasons that I haven't really hired an outside hire in a long time, which is good. It usually tells you have a good internal growth plan going inside your company and development piece and inside your company. But when you are, make sure that that's a structured, hey, this is our objective is to get a person in this spot. And this is how we're going to do that. Kind of get, understand those. Understand that a strong job posting should emphasize collaboration, innovation, those things. Yes, some of those things are just, really good writers. But I would say a job posting that can be very transparent in what the job is. When you kind of get in those situations where you get in an interview where there's a lot of gray area and you're like, I don't know if this is really there, that's probably a company that hasn't really defined the role. And that can
Mhm.
be a little bit disheartening to people who are applying for that job, right? Like, I want to work for this company, but I also just don't want to tell you I'll do anything for you because it might not be in honestly your interest, and that's where burnout and stuff like that will come into play if you just accept a job like that.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned like when you're in line and stuff, because I would also say that, you know, you may not know who's in that line with you. And it could be somebody you're about to talk to, it could be somebody else. And how you treat people, especially in the hospital. Say you're at Starbucks and maybe you're having a bad day, they screw up your order. And if you treat them terribly, there could be people there that could remember your face when you go off on somebody, or just the way you kind of interact with everyone around you. Definitely keep that in mind. I would say with the hiring practices for someone looking for a job, it is really important to look at, you know, a lot of positions, because there's a couple things to really look at that could be red flags. One being if something just keeps reposting over time. That either means that they're potentially looking for a speckled unicorn, that they're just looking for something that is so difficult and they're too picky and they're not hiring anyone. So that could say that. Or, it could have, if it gets reposted. I remember one of the conversations we had on here was that sometimes they just forget to take it down and then it
Right.
automatically reposts. So if something keeps reposting after a while, that position could have been filled months before, and then they just forgot to take it down or say that they hired somebody, and then it just keeps reposting. So definitely keep up with that. I do want to ask you one thing about kind of reaching out, because I'm sure you're in a position where people see where you're at in the company and want to reach out to you. Is there ways that that people have approached you that you would be like, ooh, this isn't a great way to approach me? I know what you're doing. So you're really nice. So you're probably still engaging with them. But is there better ways, we'll say, of approaching somebody who you probably don't know on LinkedIn, and you're looking for information, you're wanting to try to pull information from them, but you don't want to make them you don't want to get them defensive. You want to make them want to engage with you. What would you say is probably the best way to engage with somebody that you don't know to try to get some of this information from them on LinkedIn or wherever?
Honestly, that's a great question. I get more of local connect, reaching out more, right? Like, I'm in one of my restaurants. Hey, do you have some time? This, or, it's usually one of my patrons eating lunch, or, one of our guests, which is great. I would say if it's from afar in a social media, kind of thing, one, everyone's kind of has this scam alert on there. Now it's like everything is like, okay, let's make sure this isn't a scam. You don't want to tell a bunch
Mhm.
of information to people that you don't really know. So I would say that person needs to do their homework and get to know them as best they can, so they can kind of put that in there where it's like, hey, I've noticed that you posted this. Maybe like, hey, I just posted probably recently that we opened a new restaurant in Paris, Texas, right? And so, hey, I saw that you guys opened a new restaurant in Paris, Texas. Congratulations. That's super exciting. Um, I know that you're in this space, and then ask your question. Something connecting where it's not like, it's not some bot or something, or, hey, I want to sell you something, right? And so,
Right.
um, I think there's a way to do it respectfully. Also, if you're the person asking, you need to be the one to understand that you're taking up time from someone else, right? And so the one
Mhm.
thing that we can't give back is time. And so I would just be super flexible, like, and be super transparent and honest. Like, I have had situations where it's like, yeah, can we get together? And then I'm like, yeah, these are the dates that work for me. And they're like, those don't really work. It's like when it starts
Right.
becoming this hassle of like, I'm trying to track down a person that I'm really not, it has no value to me other than I want to give that, have the respect for a person that did reach out. And I understand things happen, but I think the most part is just being really, really, respectful of that person's time, and also give them a wide range of, I will make it work if it means that much to them or you. And so for me, like, I've reached out to people just for maybe some mentorship, or, hey, I'm going to be in Dallas and I know that's your local area. Is there a way we can have lunch? I'm going to be in there this day. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Make sure you follow up with, hey, I understand it didn't work out this time. Thanks for the opportunity. If something comes up, please let me know. And just
Yeah.
understand, and don't the constant, once you get a no, that's not a no forever, but give it some time, let it breathe.
Yeah. No, I love that you said the value part. And it's one of the favorite things that I've heard so far as an overarching theme of this entire thing with any guest that we've ever had on here. Of if you're going to reach out to somebody, you need to make sure you do your homework
Mhm.
before you reach out to them, and try to understand what it is that they're going through. What are some issues they may have? Where could you fill those spots? And where could you add value to them? And then if you can come to that and you can focus your conversation away from yourself and more towards them, what they're going through, what their issues are, and how you could potentially help solve those issues and how you would do it, if you can get that far,
Mhm.
then that conversation is different, because now they're probably willing to give you more time because you're talking about things they're going through. And you're not
Yeah,
just sitting here asking them, hey guys, I need a job and I need you to help me get a job. Right. And it
absolutely.
changes that conversation.
And having those questions ready, though, when there's the right time to ask those, is great. Like, I will tell you, the ones that I've had multiple cups of coffee with, right, are the people who were prepared. And,
Mm-hmm.
hey, when I said I had 30 minutes for a cup of coffee, I had 30 minutes, and they were very respectful of that. Hey, if I push it longer than that, that's fine, right? But I would say just be really super relevant of what time, you're putting towards something. And, you know, um, if you get in great conversation, that's great, but not to cut anyone off, but also remind them, hey, I knew you only had 30 minutes. I hope you have a great day. I hope we can do this again sometime. And that will really spur them wanting to do that again, right? You're keeping
For
them
sure.
engaged. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next topic, which I'm just as excited about, what is kind of if we were to tie a bow on this conversation of culture, trying to determine it in both companies you're working for, companies you're looking for, all of those things, what would be kind of your biggest piece of advice or takeaway that you would have for them when they're trying to determine this culture?
Yeah. Yeah. So to tie a bow on it, really, is culture is not this, like I said, it's not a checkbox. It's not these things that are going to constantly be all the time, but they should be the basis of decision making. They should be the basis of success. They should be how the company grows, um, and understanding that you are part of this culture. You are in this eco space that is growing, and you can either feed it fertilize it, whatever you want to call that, or you can also take away and suck nutrients out of it. And I can tell you, like, the best leaders and the best employees are those ones who are constantly trying to use those values of the company to be successful inside the company. And sometimes that's not, honestly, it's not that sexy sometimes. Sometimes it's very grunt work. And honestly, it's really humbling. I find that the most in my leaders that are successful. It's the ones that, I grew up kind of with this mentality of you leave things better than you found it. You respect people, you treat people the way they want to be treated. Those are simple things, right? But really, day to day, when you have a lot on your plate, they have a lot on their plate, how can we be successful together? Making sure that we understand that we're working with people and not robots. And, it takes soft skills and those things to really make that a higher part of it. So, I think company culture should be one of honestly, more than a job description, I would look at the company culture and try to determine that for me. I know that's why I'm successful from where I'm at. It's not what we do. It's not honestly who I do it with. It's the culture that we've created, and we really lean on that for all of our decision making. And that's what's made us very successful.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Job Seeker's Journey podcast. I want to sincerely thank JT Scott for coming on here, for sharing his knowledge, for bringing his passion to all of you. If you're ever in the Kansas or Southern Oklahoma or parts of Oklahoma City area and you're looking for a great place to eat, I highly recommend that you go to the McAllister's Deli that's ran by the Saxton Group, especially those areas that I just mentioned, as those are the ones that are ran by JT. And you'll get to see the great culture that he's created, the great service that he's created, and you can support that great company and him. If this is your first time listening, I want to say sincerely thank you. And if this is one of many episodes that you've listened to, I can't thank you enough for pressing that play button multiple times. If you know someone who is going through a job search and is looking for encouragement, looking for help, looking for information, I humbly ask you to send this on to them and tell them, I think this podcast can help you in your job search journey. From all of us here at the Job Seeker's Journey podcast, I'm Brad Stair, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.